So I'll tell you what this piece. There's two pieces here. Actually, there's a piece on there's a piece on the Gemara too. But Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky called me out on it, and let me just turn that off. Okay. Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky just called me out on it, and he said to me, "I missed the piece in Sefer Shoftim. It appears in Gemara, but originally Reb Yaakov actually wrote it on Sefer Shoftim, and he pointed it out to me." Okay, but in any event, this is a piece that deals with something I think you're familiar with. You heard it, at one time or another, even if you only learned Sefer Shoftim, many years ago, because something that stands out is that Pesel Micha, in other words, hires. Originally, he takes his son to be the Kohen, right? And his son is obviously from Ephraim, but he needs a Kohen, so he hires his son to be the Kohen. He's very happy about it. And then finally, a Kohen, a Levi, comes along, and he's so happy because at least a Levi's from the tribe, the Kohen is from the tribe of Levi. So even though he's only a Levi, he makes him a Kohen for his little shtibel, right? He builds a shtibel, Micha, and he has there, it's like there's avodah zarah in there. There's an ephod, trafim, all sorts of pagan ideas in there. And a Levi comes along, and the way it's written over there is here. Let me just get it. And say for Shoftim, chapter. I think it's chapter Yuzayin.
17.
Yuzayin.
Yuzayin, right? Right. 1 second.
17:7.
Yeah. So it says. Here. Yeah. He says it starts off by saying Pasuk Zayin exactly. Vayehi nar mi beis lechem Yehuda, mi mishpachas Yehuda. Okay, v'hu Levi v'hu gar sham. Okay, he's from the mishpacha of Yehuda, and he's a Levi, and he lives there. He lives in Beis Lechem, which is a little bit strange. The end of the pasuk is also the whole pasuk is strange, but the end it says the nar is from Beis Lechem, from Mishpacha Yehuda, and he's a Levi, and he lives there, right? I mean, what is it? If he's from there, right? So, he's coming from there. So what do you need to say? And he lives there. Okay, so you could say not only was he from there, but he was actually still living at home. He was a young guy, maybe. Okay? But it says over here, he's Nabri Beis Lechem Yehuda, which, of course, that's where Boaz is from, and David HaMelech is from. Mishpachas Yehuda, which is very strange because then it says V'hu Levi. So how do you get that? So the Gemara has a number. The Gemara in Baba Basra that deals in Yesh Nochlim has a number of different approaches. The one most accepted, I think the first one is that his mother was from Yehuda, right? And that's why it says Mishpachas Yehuda from mother. But the Gemara says they generally don't give the mother the family lineage, only the father. So why is it that? So Rashi comments, and Reb Yaakov brings it, because of Rashi, V'Rabosenu Amru. 1 second. Yeah, so Rashi does bring the first comment as well, Mina Aim, but then Reb Yaakov doesn't quote that. V'Rabosenu Amru, Lefisha Asa Maisa Menashe, Shabo Me Yehuda, Karu Mimishpachas Yehuda. Because he did an action of Menashe. He came from Yehuda. Menashe was the infamous, I should say, king, the son of Chizkiyahu, the great tzaddik, and he was an unbelievable Rasha, who was, of course, from the house of David, from Yehuda. Kol Mishpachas Yehuda. V'Levi ben Gershom ben Moshe Rabbeinu Haya. Right? He's Levi ben Gershom ben Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay? So everybody knows this strange idea because he gets hired to be the Kohen in the Beis Avodah Zarah of Micha, and he takes the job, okay? And he's the grandson of Moshe, of Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Not Reb Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So now, also at the end, it also says, just to get the full picture over here, it says, how does Reb Yaakov know that it's? I mean, how does Rashi know that he's Levi ben Gershon, right? Because Levi ben Gershon ben Moshe. Because at the end it says, at the end of chapter Yudchet, it says, "V'yonasan v'yokimu lahem b'nei Dan et hapaso." B'nei Dan stole this from. They stole this whole shul basically. They stole the Trafim. They stole, they stole the Levi. They stole the Kohen, basically. Also, they kidnapped the Kohen. I mean, they gave him a good salary. They raised the salary. So he went with them. Vayakimu lem b'nei Dan. That's pasuk lamed at the end of chapter Yudches. As apostle. V'Yonasan ben Gershom ben Menashe, who banav hayu kohanim l'shevet hadani. Okay, Yonasan, the son of Gershom, the son of Menashe. But if you notice in your Ksav Yad, I mean in your Navi Menashe, the Nun is raised. Who banav hayu kohanim l'shevet hadani ad yom glos haaretz. Him and his children. So after he died, Yonasan, his children took over as well. Okay, so that's what leads Chazal, of course, to say that this is Yonasan ben Gershon ben Moshe, because the nun of the Menashe is raised and therefore really shouldn't be there, but it was stuck in, like Rashi says, because they wanted to say that he's ben Menashe, not ben Moshe, for obvious reasons, because since he's over Avodah Zarah, or he's actually a Kohen Avodah Zarah, right? They didn't want to put Moshe's name with that for obvious reasons, right? It's not L'chvod Moshe, so they put Menashe. Okay.
When it says Vayu Kohanim L'shevet Hadani, it doesn't mean they were Kohanim L'shevet Levi. They were. The Kohanim here doesn't mean Shevet Levi. It means priests of the tribe of Dan. Yeah.
Well, Dan is the one who stole everything and set up their own, Beit Midrash or Beit Knesset, right? So that's what it means that he, that not only he did it, but his children then did it. Which we'll have to talk about why he did it and what he thought. That's the Gemara in Baba Basra already, and Rabbi Yaakov's going to discuss that. He has some interesting things to say about it, and that's why I wanted to pick it. But let's take a look at the first piece, and then there's a second piece. Just so you know, okay, when we see the second piece, I'll point it out. Kosav Rashi, for Rabbeinu Amru. Oh, we did that already, okay? V'yonasan Megersher, okay. Kemo shemafurish, column, left column on top. Moshe be'inyan. Yonasan Gershom be'menashe hu banav hayu kohanim l'shevet adini ad yom glos haaretz. V'hinei be'emes temua keitzad yotzalo Moshe Rabbeinu neched she'oved avodah zarah. How did he have a grandson that was an Oved Avodah Zarah? A Gadol Batorah like Moshe Rabbeinu, to have a grandson as Oved Avodah Zarah, it's quite difficult to say such a thing, right?
I mean, we have Avram and Ishmael, we have Yitzchak and Esau, we have examples of greats with kids who are not exemplars of behavior.
Right, but Reb Yaakov would probably say, again, I don't disagree, but Reb Yaakov probably would say, after Matan Torah, you would think that something struck a chord over here. Moshe, my grandfather, a lot of times I'd like to do something, but then I think, Reb Yaakov, what would he say about it? Could you imagine having Moshe Rabbeinu? What would Moshe Rabbeinu say about it? It's like unbelievable to say that.
Yeah.
Okay. V'atshuvahi b'pnei sheMoshe iftiach liYisro shaben harishon sheyivoled lo yeh mugdash lavodah zarah. You guys probably know this, that there is a chazal like this, and Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky points out the Zehayu Gershon, right? Gershon was the firstborn, right? And he promised Yisro, according to Chazal, that he would set him aside, that he would be mukdash lavodah zarah, whatever that means. Meaning, he'll be involved with Avodah Zarah, probably in Midyan. So Reb Yaakov says, therefore, he had a neched, because Moshe Rabbeinu's son Gershon didn't fulfill the Tanai with Yisro. right? He didn't become one of the workers of Avodah Zarah. So therefore, because he promised Yisro. But we have to ask the question, of course, how do you promise something like that? It's a pella, right? Yisro says your first child has to go to the Avodah Zarah in Midian. Moshe should have said to him, what are you, out of your mind? Like, he should have said, I owe you my life, but I can't give you my son as an Oved Avodah Zarah, That's already Harig Val Yavar. I owe you my life, but I also owe God's my life, right? So Rabbi Yaakov says, since Moshe already made that promise, we're not going into yet why Moshe Rabbeinu was able to make that promise. Some people want to say, I just want to say something. It's a Chiddush Norah. Some people say, I don't remember if it's Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, but he says, you see the unbelievable chashivas of Hakaras HaTov. That Moshe Rabbeinu al Hakaras HaTov, was willing to give us. It's a little bit too. I think it's a little over the red line to say that. But I don't remember if Chaim Shmulevitz says it, but I remember somebody does say it. Ubemes shezos hasiba madulo karam miyad et shem Eliezer al beno b'charo. Really, he should have called his b'char Eliezer, because what does Eliezer mean? Eliezer means, he says, Moshe Rabbeinu says, because God was with me, right? Azarli, right? How does it say over there? Where is it? It's in, is it in Parshas Yisro? Where it says, maybe it's the beginning of Parshas Yisro, I don't remember. Let me just check.
This is V'yol Moshe l'shevet Ta'ish, on that pasuk I think the Mechilta is talking about.
The Mechilta, which pasuk? What again?
I think on the pasuk of V'yol Moshe l'shevet Ta'ish.
So that's where the Chazal say, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, that Moshe Rabbeinu promised him, correct?
Yes.
Now, over here, it says, in beginning of Yisro, of course, comes to Moshe, right? V'shem ha'echad Eliezer, ki Elokei havi be'ezri, right? The God of my father was with me, right? So Rabbi Yaakov is pointing out that he should have really called his first son that, right? That's you start off. The second one is Gegera Yisi Beretz Nachriya, right? But the first one is God saved my life, right? So he says, no, Moshe didn't want to keep Pachat Yishael Yisro Shigdu Lavodah Zarah V'Loratzah Shem Shemayim Yikra Mishum Yuchad Lavodah Zarah. Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid that the first son he promised to Yisro. So if he names him Eliezer, he knows that if he has to volunteer him for Avodah Zarah, he didn't want his name is going to be Eliezer, right? God, my God, Kel, God of the Jewish people, is my strength. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu did not want to name his first son Eliezer. He named him Gershon, which is much more powerful. And then the second one, he made up for that. Okay, this is the Mukubalim, what they say. Now, the only sefer I'm familiar with that Reb Yaakov studied as Kabbalah is the Shnei Luchos HaBris, okay? The Shloach, right? That's the only one I'm familiar with. Now, maybe you studied other ones, but I'm not familiar with it. There's another one that's a history book that I think I mentioned here already. It's called Seder Adoros, and he brings certain Kabbalistic, he brings Gilgulim there. I know Reb Yaakov knew that one also. Those are the two Svarim he had, and I know he
Sefer
learned
Gilgulim.
What?
Sefer Gilgulim?
It's not Sefer Gilgulim. It's Seder Hadoros from, I forget the name. He was a Minsk, a Rav in Minsk, okay? And Reb Yaakov was from Minsk. So Reb Yaakov was very proud that he was from his town, from his city, right? And he wrote, I think his name was Halpern, and he wrote a history book from the beginning of time, one thick volume, all the way until 1861, I think. Okay, I think he even mentions America in there, if I remember correctly. Okay, so Reb Yaakov knew that sefer, and there to talk, he sometimes. That's why I told you that Shimshon's father, right, Manoach, right, was I mean, Shimshon, I think he says it about Shimshon, that Shimshon was a Gilgal of Nadav, right? That we had that piece where Reb Yaakov writes that Shimshon was a Gilgal of Nadav, because Nadav, drank wine, so Shimshon was not allowed to drink wine. All these skulas, in other words, in order to do an atonement for what what's Nadav didn't get married, so Shimshon only was able to marry non-Jewish women who he was converted, but non-Jewish women, right? He has all these things about these, the equation between Shimshon and Nadav. So Rabbi Yaakov saw that in the Sefer Ador. So Rabbi Yaakov added that Avihu is Manoach, because he's called Avihu in a few places, and so they're both right. They're both Nadav Avihu are the Gilgulim of Manoach and Shimshon. And Rabbi Yaakov, I think we learned it, goes into Be'iyun about that. And he also quotes like Kabbalistic things. Here also he says Mekubalim. So Rabbi Yosef points out that it's in the Makaris from the Arizal, Sefer Likutei Torah. I'm not sure that Rabbi Yaakov knew the Likutei Torah, but he says Gamuva B'Shla Kadosh. So that Rabbi Yaakov did know. Okay, so what does it say there? Sheramoz kan b'pasuk v'hu garsham. Now, if you look at that pasuk that we started off with, right, by Yehi Nami Beis Lechem Yehuda Mishpachas Yehuda v'hu Levi v'hu garsham, right? Now, if you put those two words together, it's Gershom, right? So who Garsham, right? The Hainu, this is the Mekubolim. The Hainu, the Inyan Zeh, right? Shalevi Hazeh, Yotzal Avod Zorah, who Besibas Gershom. So, in other words, he's showing already that the idea that Yonasan went to serve Avodah Zarah, or at least be a shamus to Avodah Zarah, right? It came from the word Gershon. It came from the idea of Gershon, meaning because he couldn't give Gershon, or he didn't give Gershon to Yisro. So that's the remez over here, that V'hu Levi, V'hu Gershon, V'hu Garsham, in other words, that's the remez to Reb Yaakov, that because Moshe promised Yisro that his son is going to become Avodah Zarah, or at least work in the church, so to speak, right? So therefore, Gershon had to become that, right? And he didn't become it, so now Yonasan had to become it, because Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't lie, so someone from the family had to come into Avodah Zarah. That's the way the Baalei Kabbalah understand this idea, and that's because it looks a little bit extra. V'hu Garsham. He lives there. I mean, it says he's from Yehuda. Who cares where he lives, right? Who Garsham, right? And in fact, the next pasuk is what?
I just want to say there's also seems to be a remez, not to the name, but when it says there's an echo of the beginning of Sefer Shmos where it says V'yoel halevi l'shevet et ish. I think there's a pasuk that says V'yoel Moshe l'shevet im Yitro.
What? Where are you? After Moshe Rabbeinu marries Tzipporah?
Yeah, in pasuk Yud Aleph.
What chapter?
Here in Shoftim, pasuk Yud Aleph. That seems to be an echo of. I'm looking for it as I'm talking to you. I don't want to hold up the shear, but I just don't hold up the shear, but I think that's
the whole source. V'yoel Moshe l'shevet et ish. The word v'yoel, I think they're coming from the word Allah, an oath, a shvua.
Oh, because in Yud Aleph it says V'yoel halevi l'shevet seish, right? So you're saying that's also a remez, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I want you to know, I don't remember, but there is a chazal that says when Dan meets Yonatan, they use language that God uses on Moshe, right? I'll just find it for you. I think Rashi might actually bring it like this. It says like this. Here. Melech B'Israel. And Shevetan is looking for an achla. Here. Okay.
Here, I found it in Shmot Bet Kaf Aleph. It says, Vayoel Moshe Shevet et Ish.
Right, correct. So you're saying that the Levi, they use the same words.
The Navi is definitely mimicking the Lashon of Moshe by Yitro.
So again, I don't remember, maybe the Das Mikra does point it out. It's excellent. He might point it out. But there's a whole base thing here. In Pasuk Gimel, chapter Yudches, Pasuk Gimel, so when Dan comes to Micha's house, so they ask the Levi, right? Vemikiris kol hanara Levi. They recognize the voice of the Levi. It doesn't say how they recognized it. Mi haviacha halom umata osa bazeh umalacha po. Who brought you here, right? And what are you doing in this? Like they're looking at him. Umalacha po. So Rashi says yesh kad tamios harbe. There's many questions. Lo mizaro shel Moshe Rabbeinu ata shenembar al tikrav halom. Umisam peleish, right? Malcha, right? Misam peleish, right? Umazeh biyodecha, right? So the Chazal look for the similar language, right? Umata osa bazeh, right? Mazeh biyodecha, malacha po, right? Misam peleish, right? It's the same pen po, right? So they're really doing exactly what Wayne is saying, so to speak. The Chazal are. I don't know if I doubt that the one that you point out, which I think is excellent, is in the Chazal. I don't remember seeing that in Baba Basra, but it's clear that Chazal are saying that there's a connection here between Moshe Rabbeinu and Yonatan, more than just being a grandson. There's like a connection because of something that happened, right? And so Wayne is saying Vayoel Moshe and Vayoel Aish is trying to say that just like Moshe was Vayoel because he was saved by Yisro, so also this fellow was saved by Micha. He didn't have what to eat. Micha also saved him. So there's a connection here between Moshe and Yonatan, more than just him being a grandson. So that's what Reb Yaakov is really saying over here, is that the Gar Sham is a remez to the fact. That's what the Kabbalah says. So Reb Yaakov says, I have every right to say that since Moshe did, according to Chazal, assure Yisro that he's going to have a child he's going to set aside for Avodah Zarah, so it had to happen. Basically, that's what Reb Yaakov was saying over here, that it had to happen. Okay,
I just want to also mention regarding that pasuk in Shmot Bet Kaf Aleph, the very next pasuk is the pasuk in which Gershom gets his name.
Good point. Right, he's born and gets his name, right? Yeah. Okay, but the Chazal don't point out Garsham and Gershom. That's the Bali Kabbalah already say that. Okay. Klomar, Gershom hu kimo Garsham, kach gam kan merumas Hashem. Right? Gershom is kimo Garsham. So therefore, over here, by us, you have a remez over here to the shame of Gershom. Meaning, right, that Yonason, when the text says about him, right, the text says about him that he is, one second. Yeah. When the text says, Vu Levi, Vu Garsham, right, it's already being Merames to the whole story that's going to happen over here, that he's going in place of Gershom. right? It's a very interesting idea. First of all, it's a chiddush in the idea of Moshe Rabbeinu somehow it had to get fulfilled. I mean, I wouldn't have said that by myself. That, like, Moshe Rabbeinu, if he says to Yitro, I'm sorry, I can't give avodah zarah, so it has to get fulfilled in the next generation. I normally wouldn't have said that with regard to avodah zarah, but you see clearly that that's what Reb Yaakov is saying, and that's what even the Bali Kabbalah are being meramis to, that Gershom is a remiss to Gershom, because through Gershom he had to become the idea. And then you can't ask anymore, how is Moshe Rabbeinu zocha to a grandchild like this? Because it was Moshe Rabbeinu's fault, because he was maftiach him. And we're not saying that even though he's maftiach him, you can't be maftiach someone such a thing. Right? It doesn't work. You can't be maftiach someone you give a kid over for avodah zarah. It's as a mitzvah b'avera. You can't do that. But you see from here a chiddush nora that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to do it, right? And it came to fruition in any event, so to speak. So I mean, it's just a tremendous chiddush. I don't know what we can use this for, but it is a major chiddush. Okay, so I want to stop there because the rest of Reb Yaakov here deals with the name Gershon and Gershom, right? If they're the same name or not. And the truth is, if you write Gershom with a mem in a get, and the guy's name is Gershon, the get is pasul. That's what Reb Yaakov has a discussion about. But I'm not going to go into that right now. Let's skip page 3 because Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky will be angry at me, because I found something in the Gemara. Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky said, it's already by me in the Nacht. So why you have to go to the Gemara of Rabbi Yaakov? So I don't want to upset him too much. So if you go to page 4, right? For Yonasim ben Gershon, the first one, there's 2. So the first one on the left, on the right column at the bottom. Yonasim ben Gershon ben Menashe, hu banav hayu kohanim l'shevet adani ad yom gelot haaretz. Okay,
Rabbi Shurin, is this from the Sefer from?
This is from Chelik Aleph in the Sefer.
Right. Okay. So
okay.
I'm just trying to.
So it says what?
Reish Ayin Zayin.
Reish Ayin Zayin. Okay. So Reb Yaakov starts off by saying Baba Basher Kuf Tes Amid Bet V'chi Ben Menashe. Was he Ben Menashe? He was Ben Moshe. He was not Ben Menashe. Ela mitoch she'asa Ma'aser Menashe Tolo Akosu b'Menashe. Because he did a Ma'aser of Menashe by becoming a Kohen Lavodah Zarah, right? So the pasuk hangs him on Menashe. Calls Moshe Rabbeinu. He puts in the nun to guard Moshe Rabbeinu's covet and calls him Menashe. So I always had this question for years, and I found out that Reb Yaakov had the question. Lo yadati ech yitachen sheshmuel hanavi shekasav sefer shoftim yitla b'Menashe shel. What?
Excuse me for interrupting. Where are you reading from?
It's Kuf Ayin Zayin. Are you Chelik Aleph?
Yeah, you're reading from Reish Ayin Zayin now?
Yeah, on the bottom right.
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
You see it?
See that. Okay.
So Reb Yaakov says, Lo yadati ech yitachen sheshmuel hanavi shekosav sefer shoftim yitla b'Menashe shelo yadu b'doro mihu. It's hard to believe that Shmuel, who wrote Sefer Shoftim, right, wrote the word Menashe because of the Menashe at the end of the first temple period. Shmuel had no clue about the Menashe at the end of the first temple period, right? I remember having this question years and years ago, okay? I'm going to tell you what I answered, but, Reb Yaakov for some reason doesn't want to answer it. V'im hayim mekubal eitzlom acharei sheshmuel kosav sifro Sifro Zeh Sheyeh BeYehuda Rasha Mefursim Sheshmo Yeh Menashe. If they had a Kabbalah that one day, after Shmuel wrote this Sefer, that there's going to be in Yehuda a Rasha Mefursam that's name is going to be Menashe. I remember Yaakov doesn't love it, but maybe he said, Eich Korech Chizkiyo HaMelech Et Shem Beno B'Shem Zeh. In other words, if they had a Kabbalah and you're reading Sefer Shoftim, why would he call his son Menashe? Right? He knows Menashe, from Sefer Shoftim, they put the nun in by Moshe because Menashe is going to be a Rasha. So if I was Chizkiyo, I would call my my kid Avraham. Why would I call him Menashe? So he says, V'tzorachin gadol b'chol zeh. He doesn't really know. And Reb Yosef doesn't even try to answer it, so to speak. Anyway, the point over here is, the way I always answered it, and I think it's even on the side of my Navi, is that you have to say that this was added later. That Ezra and Nehemiah added, in other words, it was written, Yonasan ben Gershon ben Moshe. And a lot of times they were makbid, with kreis and ksivs on the cover, here on the cover of Moshe, on the cover Shel Yisrael, right? So they put certain amendments, but they put it in here with a nun in the ear. So you would know that the way it's supposed to be written is Mem Shin Hey. The way we write it now is with a little nun. When you write, if you look at, does anyone have in his shul the klaf, that they read shoftim from a klaf?
Yes.
Yeah. You have that, right? So if you look over here, you'll see the nun is higher. That's the way they write it. So it could be that Ezra and Nehemiah, they did I don't want to say an editing, because it's not, they didn't really change things that were written by Nevi'im. But in certain cases when it's going to be obvious that they're making, that they're covering up for the covet of somebody, they did that. And here it's obvious what it is, and therefore they didn't worry about it. That's the way I learned, but Reb Yaakov didn't learn that way. Reb Yaakov remained Sarachian on it. Okay? Okay. So now the next piece is right below Tzarachin Godel B'chol Zeh, and this is the next piece. Okay? And this is again about, as you see, Yonasan ben Gershon ben Menashe, who banav hoyu kohanim l'shevet adani. Kvar kasafti la'el, Yud Zayin Zayin, al chet shel Moshe Rabbeinu shivtiach, okay, liyisro shebeno yiyeh kohen la'avodah zarah, v'zeh mamash chet se'etza'av. Now listen what he says, that because al chet shel Moshe Rabbeinu, unbelievable, huh? The sin of Moshe Rabbeinu, shevtiach liyisro shebeno yiyeh kohen la'avodah zarah, v'zeh mamash chet se'etza'av, and this is the chet of all his offspring, meaning Yonatan, and it says Yonatan ubanav kohanim l'shevet adani, right? Because Moshe Rabbeinu did this, and it was a chet. Now, it's not in the Tanach, so the Tanach can't tell you it was a chet. And Chazal also I don't remember that Chazal say it was a chet that he did. But Reb Yaakov says he shouldn't have done it for obvious reasons, right? It could be they learned from Moshe Rabbeinu, Sheba'onis im yesh korach. I guess is that a modern Hebrew word?
Korach? Like hachrech, probably.
Yeah, from hachrech, but I never saw it used that way. Im yesh korach, is that what the lawyers use? Right?
Where is that?
In the text, the fourth line in the text says, V'ulai lamdu mimenu im yesh korach.
Yeah.
They use that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not so common, but it's used, yeah.
Like a necessity.
Yeah.
Im yesh korach mutter. If there's a necessity, you have to do it. Meaning, they actually learned this from Moshe Rabbeinu, Reb Yaakov says. Since Moshe Rabbeinu said that, I'm going to give one of my children for avodah zarah, maftiach Yisro. So they said, look, you see, when you're an onus, you're allowed to do that. Kamoshaya onus me Yisro. He had to do it for Yisro. He doesn't say exactly why, but he owed Yisro his life, so he did it. Vayin Gumara Baba Basra Kuf Yud Aman Aleph Shama Yonas and Kach Mikublani Mi Beis Avi Abba. Okay, the lashon that Yonasan uses, according to Chazal, is this is what I got from Avi Abba, my grandfather Moshe Rabbeinu. La'olam yaskir adam atzmo la'avodah zarah v'al yitztarach lebrios.
Wow.
A person should sell himself for avodah zarah. It's the Gemara in Baba Basra, right? In order not to come on to tzedakah. Okay, so he says. You see that he says kach. Where does he get this kach mikublani? He says so. Reb Yaakov wants to say that he got it from Moshe Rabbeinu. That Moshe Rabbeinu was maftiach Yisro. It's a chiddush nora what he's saying here, right? Ayin Sham B'Gemara Shetabazeh. Right? He made a mistake because Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say that. What did he say? V'usavel avodah zara mamish v'lohi ela avodah zara avodah shezara lo. Right? It doesn't mean avodah zara. It means avodah zara. Right? It doesn't mean one word avodah zara, but avodah zara, foreign work. In other words, a person should sell himself for work that's beneath his dignity, right? In order to make a living. That's what the Gemara says, right? Kid'amale Rav Rav Kahana, right? Rav said to Rav Kahana, if you remember, Netosh Nevilta Beshuka, you should, what's the word? Not scrape, but skin and avela in the shuk. Ushkol agra velo tema gavaraba navazila beit milsa. A person should skin the animal, the nevela, in the shuk and take money for it. And he shouldn't say, I'm a very chashuv person. Gavarabana, vizila beit milsa. It's beneath my dignity to do this type of work, right? So you see, even a Talmud Chacham, Rav, who was a Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, says this klal, right? He says it on what Yonasan, according to Chazal, said. He says that's what it meant, but he misinterpreted it as avodah zarah. So he sold himself to Micha to become the shamus in the shul, so to speak, right? So Ayin Sham Harei Shehem Chashvu Shemikorach again Parnasa Hutalio Shamash Lavozar. In other words, Rev Yonasan and his children felt that because they had a need to make a living, right? They're allowed to do this, I don't know.
But for Parnasa, you can go ahead and do it.
So the question is, can you actually serve avodah zarah for Parnasa, right? That's the question, right? So Reb Yaakov is going to discuss that, okay? But I just want to let you know something, that Reb Yaakov became a Cheder Rebbe in World War I in, I forget what town it was. I'll remind myself, in Russia, in Poland, right? He became a Cheder Rebbe. And when someone who knew him met him, he said, isn't it beneath your dignity to become a Cheder Rebbe? He was already in his mid-20s, and he was considered the best guys in Slobodka. So isn't it beneath your dignity? So he says, the other option is to starve to death. Yaakov told him, the other option is to starve to death, right? So, and today we have Talmid Chacham today. They wouldn't do things, lo lefi chvodi, this, that, right? You see from this Gemara, not like that. Rav himself says you could skin an animal in the shuk, right? Which obviously I don't know much about that, but obviously it wasn't being like the CEO of a high tech company. You know what I mean? It was, and yet, right? So this is what Reb Yaakov says. Harei shehem chashu mikorach parnasa huter lios shamash lavod zar vareze kitos hashoel. And this is like the mistake that the show b'shayil sechuvas haratvaz chelik dalet tzadik beis. This is a very famous ratvaz shechoshav shalafia Rambam. The Rambam writes, of course, you know that the Rambam writes that Yishmael, the Bnei Yishmael, are not over the avodah zarah. He doesn't say it about the Bnei the Notzrim, but Bnei Yishmael are not over the avodah zarah. And Reb Yaakov points out, Ayin Yurav Macholos Asuras Halacha Zayin. He has something with regard to the Bnei Yishmael, with regard to Macholos. The Shalosh Shus Rambam, that I don't think Reb Yaakov knew. That's probably Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky. But Reb Yaakov just wrote Lefia Rambam, She'ena Islam avodah zarah afilu lit aslain. Even it's not avodah zarah, and you don't have to be Yeher Val Yavar lit aslain. Sharei Ein Sham avodah shel avodah zarah. Kigon Hishtachavi lepesel. Okay, Elarak Inyan Shalamuna Shenoged at Ikar Ashvi Shalavuas Moshe. What is the problem with Islam? It goes against the 7th of the 13 principles of faith, where it says Lo Kam, Kamosha, Lo Kam Nabitz Kamosha Od, right? Naviu Mabid is, as Tmuna so, right? So that because according to them, they had a Navi, right? They have Muhammad that was rose, right? that rose up to be a Navi like Moshe. So he says that's apikoursis. But beyond that, there's no service in the mosque or the way they serve that's against halacha. V'lachein chashvu she'im belev ein ma'amin ein oz be'etzem ein osa klum. In other words, if I change my religion to Islam, right? I convert to Islam, right? So the guy who was speaking in the Charles Shuvas Arad Vaz, he said, I could do that because I won't be believing that. I'll just tell them I believe it, right? I'll tell them that I believe it. Kamo Kain, Choshav Halevi, Shekivan She'ena Ovid Avodah Zara, Mutter Leo Sham, Shamis, Muthio Shamis, Bishvil Parnasaso, Sharei Einama Min Bazeh. In other words, we always assumed that when he became a Kohen, this Levi, Yonatan, right? We always assumed that he believed in it, He was he was a Kohen there and he did the service. Reb Yaakov says, no, he didn't believe in it. You need to make a living. It's like, I'll tell you what it's like. I knew a number of conservative rabbis. I'll give you one example. A conservative rabbi, after he retired, he only davened in an Orthodox shul after he retired, never in a conservative shul, right? Or if there was no minyan on Shabbos in the conservative shul, Rabbi Wine told me this, that he had, I think, a cousin or something that was a conservative rabbi in Chicago, and they only had a minyan on Shabbos if there was a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah. So when there was no bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, they didn't have a minyan, and he used to go daven in Orthodox shul, the rabbi, right? So it's not uncommon. I don't know if you guys experienced this, but as a kid, I experienced it very, very often. There was an Orthodox rabbi that went to a conservative shul because he couldn't find Parnasa, right? Don't forget, Jewish nation was quite small. Orthodoxy was quite small in the 50s and 60s. So if he wasn't an outstanding rabbi, he was just a rabbi, even if he went to Tarvadas or Chaim Berlin or something, right? He took a job as a conservative rabbi, or he took a job in a shul that didn't have a mechitza, right? There was a fellow in Albany, New York. It was not a conservative shul, it was traditional, without a mechitza. And I asked Reb David Cohen if he does a giyur, and it's kahalacha, is he possible to be a dayan? Reb David Cohen said, absolutely not. I know who he is. He took the job for Parnasa. Okay? And I knew a fellow in Israel, a rabbi in Israel, conservative rabbi in Milwaukee, for 30 years. As soon as he left the shul, he was only davening Orthodox. He was never a conservative person. So you see, you could believe in one thing and do another thing, because times are bad, right? So that's exactly what we're talking about here. Reb Yaakov says that's what Yonasan ben Gershon ben Moshe did. He took a job, but he never believed in it. Okay? He never believed in it. He just took the job because he needed the money, right? I don't know if any of you ever saw that there were people who took jobs like this, that, religious jobs, but they didn't believe in what they were doing because they knew it's all Baba Mises, conservative movement or reform. Reform, I don't remember anybody, but conservative I remember, right? And they didn't really believe it, but they needed the Parnasa. And Reb David Cohen said he needed Parnasa. What do you want from him, right? And Rav Soloveitchik, by the way, also allowed it if you were able to change. Eventually, you change them. He allowed it for a certain amount of time if you could change it. He did it with Rabbi Riskin, if I'm not mistaken. He told Rabbi Riskin, you could be a rabbi in Lincoln Square Synagogue within a certain, I forget if it was a year or two. It has to have a mechitza, or you have to leave the shul. Right? So he did put up a mechitza, but I was never able to find the mechitza, but they told me it's there. Right? That's why they used to call it not Lincoln Square, they used to call it Wink and Stare. Right? Because the men see the women the whole time. So I don't know.
They remodeled it. It looks different now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah? Okay, good. Yeah. It's the guy from Cambridge now is the rabbi there.
Rabbi Robinson.
Rabbi Robinson, Shoal Robinson, right? So he's already a frummer guy already, so he probably did an upgrade, so to speak, on the Mechitza,
He's
right?
a student of Rabbi Bravender.
Oh yeah, I know. Right, Bravender is a very frum guy.
Yeah.
He lived in he probably still lives in Mattersdorf.
Yeah.
A place I probably couldn't survive, but he lives there anyway. So,
Rabbi Shurin, that story is also the story of Rabbi Meir Kahana's first shul.
That's right. You are correct.
My parents were members of that shul.
You remember what's the name of the neighborhood? I forgot the name.
Regal Park.
Park. Yeah. Right. Yeah, a lot of Rabbanim gave. I mean, Gedolim even gave heterim for it. Some didn't. Right. Rabbi Soloveitchik said he wrote in the smicha on tonight that you don't go to a conservative or a traditional shul. If you do, the smicha is batul, I'm afraid.
Wow.
But a lot of Gedolei Torah were they said, look, you need to make a parnas. So who am I to make your family starve? So
unfortunately, in some places it was the opposite. I went to to a shul in Houston, this big conservative shul, huge, and the rabbi there had gone to Torah Das. He got up there and ranted and raved against Torah Judaism.
Okay, so that's a very different type of thing.
He was an angry guy.
That's a shanu pirish, right? Yeah. It's a guy who has to make everything right, because he's doing it. It has to be right. But I'll give you an example. When I went to University of Florida, Gainesville, so the Hillel rabbi got a Orthodox smicha from Torah Vodaas. Okay, and he opened up his wedding album, and he showed me Reb Yaakov was his Masada Kedushin.
Wow.
The wedding album, right? So I said to him, so he says, but I need a parnasa, right? And most of the kids here are conservative. So I had to, on campus have a conservative. I also have a place for an Orthodox shul, but there's no minyan. Today there would be a minyan already, but then I'm talking 30 years ago, there was no minyan, right? And he says, so I did that. But then I said to him, how do you get here on Shabbos? So he says, look, I used to walk, but I'm a little bit older now, so it's a little bit too far, so I drive. So you see, little by little, but he didn't defend himself. He didn't say there's a tshuva from the conservative movement, they're allowed to drive. He didn't defend himself. He just said, this is what happens. That's truly what happens in many cases, right? So certainly, Reb Yaakov is saying that Yonasan ben Gershon didn't serve Avodah Zarah, no question about it. But he was like the Kohen there, but he didn't really believe in it. Now, I want to tell you something. I don't remember where this is, but maybe someone can Google it. There is definitely a Chazal somewhere. I doubt it's in the Bavli because Reb Yaakov doesn't bring it. If it would be in the Bavli, he would bring it. There's a Chazal somewhere, maybe it's a Medrash somewhere, that people came to Yonasan when he was there, and they said, do a sacrifice. And he says, what, are you out of your mind? This is a bunch of Baba Mices here. He says to them, it's a bunch of Baba Mices. So they say, so what should we do? He says, go home, right? Bring me a meal, and I'll daven for you, and that'll be much better. There's a medrash like that. And that's clear from the medrash that he held it was Baba Mices. But, you got to make a living. So that was it, right? So Reb Yaakov here ends off by saying, right? In the Torah, you have this case of an Eved Ivri that is sold to a guy. The guy became like a wealthy guy living in Israel, right? Rashi b'chumash me'agemara b'kedushin b'metzia darshino ola ker mishpachas ger, right? What does that pasuk mean? The whole pasuk is not so clear, but it's a pasuk in Vayikra in Bahar, right, where it talks all about selling yourself for a slave and geula being pulled to the field and the people. Oh, lakor mishpachat ger. Is it lakor or laker? I think it's laker. No. Chaf hey mem zayin. Chaf hey mem zayin. The word is a very unusual word here. Mem zayin. Here. Yeah. Ola ker, mishpachas ger. Okay? V'chi sasig yad ger v'toshav imach, u'mocha chicha imo v'nimka leger toshav imach. The Jew is sold to the non-Jew. Ola ker mishpachas ger. So how does he understand it? He says, or to an idol of a sojourning family. He's sold to avodah zarah. That's what Reb Yaakov says, according to the Gemara. Zanimka avodah zarah atzmo liyoslo shamash upirish Rashi v'lo elokus ela lachtov eitzim v'lishov mayim. It means lachtov eitzim v'lishov mayim. In other words, you're working for the avodah zarah, right? But it doesn't really mean that you're serving, that the Eved Ivri is going to serve it. Now on the bottom, 412, he brings something that's classical Reb Yaakov. Rabbeinu tziyer vehimchish matzav zeh b'teyur shel Yehudi achotev eitzim b'shvil ovdei eish. And the Gemara in the Durham says there was a Jew that took a job to cut wood for the people who believed in the fire god. Okay? Oh, Ovid b'beit Tifla shalem litzaltzel b'pa'amon kol yom rishon. Can you take a job to ring the bell in the church every Sunday morning? You're not serving avodah; you're just going up there to the top and ring the bell, right? V'hu nishar ashener yid, and he remains ashener yid. That's what Rabbi Yaakov says over here. V'hu nishar ashener yid, right? In other words, he's still, he's completely from. I'll give you an example that happened with, you guys know this guy, Ramosha Weinberger. He's like this rabbi in the Five Towns.
Sure.
He looks like a Hasidic guy from YU, right? He's a YU guy, but he's like, Hasidic today and everything. So he tells a story, I once heard. He tells a story that when he was a little kid, his mother, before Christmas, took him shopping, I think, in Macy's.
Right, he met Santa,
and he saw Santa Claus, and he said, "Mommy, I'd like to also sit on his lap." So she said, "Chas v'sholem, you're not allowed to do it." So when his mother walked away, he ran over to Santa, and he put him on his lap, and he had a kippah on. So he says, my mother didn't want me to be on your lap because it's Christianity. So he goes, what are you talking about? Ich bin a Yid. He says it in Yiddish. Ich bin a Yid. And he gives him like 10 toys.
Right.
He says, I walked away with like 10 big toys. Right? So that's what Reb Yaakov said. You ring the bell, you come and say, in what do you call it? In Atlanta, there was a Santa Claus that was from. I don't know where he got a heter, but he got a heter to be Santa Claus, and he was a from guy. He didn't even have to grow a beard. He had the real deal. He had a nice gray beard, and he put on the clothes in Atlanta. You maybe could Google it, because I know there was a controversy about it, but I heard that a Rav gave him a heter to do it for Parnasa. Okay, guys, we'll stop here. We'll take it up next week, Bezrat Hashem.
Okay.
Doesn't the Shut Rashba say that the Shut what was it? What? He's the Shoel and the Shut
in the Ratvaz
made a mistake. That he mistakenly thinks this.
Right. So in other words, it's much from the Ratvaz that you're not allowed to do it.
Rav Yaakov says the same thing.
Right.
Yeah, he says that it's an error.
Right. In other words, you're really not allowed to do it. But they thought that if I'm not serving avodah zarah, I'm allowed. Right. It's a pretty good avamid if you think about it. Right. But I don't think Reb Yaakov would have told someone to even, ring the bell for the church on Sunday morning. He would also said you shouldn't take parnasa like that. Okay. But the point is that Reb Yaakov was clearly saying, misvara, that we're not talking about real avodah zarah. We're talking here about just playing along in order to make a living.
But that's still forbidden.
Yeah, Reb Yaakov held it was forbidden, and could be Reb Yaakov would have held that even a conservative shul he wouldn't let you go into. I don't know. I never asked him. But there were definitely gedolim that allowed it. Okay, guys, we'll stop here. We'll take it up next week.
Okay,